I just made it.
Yes, you did. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to In the Blender with Brandon and Madeline Hyman. And on tonight, we have a very special guest who is none other than my own sister in love. She is going to be discussing tonight requesting leave if you or a family member is dealing with mental health issues or mental health illness. Our last few episodes or broadcasts, we've been talking about mental health. So we wanted to inform people on how they can request time off during these difficult times. We know that these last couple years has been challenging probably for almost everybody. I don't know anyone personally that hasn't been affected, by what we've been going through the last couple of years. I don't know anyone who hasn't been affected in one way or another, whether it was themselves or a family member. We've had a lot of some people have lost jobs, some have had family members that's lost jobs, some have lost family members. So we're going to share, give some insight on tonight on some of the things that you can do that can help you during this time. Also, a lot of people dealing not only with those issues, but then they have to go to work and try to deal with their everyday work situation when they're dealing with different issues. So we're going to turn it over to Sin, and we're going to let her start off by telling us a little bit about herself, her background, how she got started, why she got started, and then we will go from there. So welcome, Sin. Welcome to In the Blender with Brandon and Madeline. Hi,
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Sure, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Cynthia Payne, and I am a human resources professional. I have been in human resources, leadership, and administration for just about 20 years. So I will say I am not an attorney, and so nothing I say tonight should be legal advice. However, I do know a whole lot about HR topics, requesting leave, specifically around things like family medical leave, and that's really what I wanted to focus on tonight. So my background, I have a master's in organizational leadership. I have an MBA with a concentration in human resources. I have a graduate certificate of advanced graduate studies in business and human resources. I also have a advanced graduate studies certificate in employee benefits. I have a certificate in diversity and inclusion. I am certified to train on topics like avoiding discrimination and harassment in the workplace. I am a just culture champion. I have taught conflict resolution and negotiation on the graduate level in college in an MBA program. And like I said, I've been in human resources and leadership for about 20 years now. So that's a little bit about me. And why did I get into human resources? So very early in my career, and I think I've told the story before, as a manager, I was in an organization that wanted to do reduction in forces. And basically that is kind of laying people off for budget reasons, and then whether that was temporary change of schedule or just laying them off completely. And it was for budgetary reasons. And me being kind of new to management, I really couldn't understand why we were kind of laying off people or putting people on a reduced schedule who made literally $8 an hour. To me, that's, stepping over pennies and things like that. And so I remember, kind of asking executive leadership, like, why are we not being affected in this way? Why are we not being, our schedule's not being reduced since we make more? And, really remember having a conversation with the executive director, kind of taking a stand on, this doesn't make sense to me. The people that we are reducing their schedule are single mothers who, almost minimum wage, makes no sense to me. And after that experience, I decided I needed to look into management differently and wanted to be able to have a better understanding of employee rights and employee engagement and things like that. And so that was really the driver for me getting my degrees in organizational leadership, but also really transitioning into human resources.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. You got a lot right
It
there.
is. It is. It's a lot. It's a lot. So, in talking a little bit about mental health, you and I talked about what does it mean to kind of request leave, during times like when whether it's for yourself or for a family member, and I really wanted to talk a little bit about family medical leave. Um, family medical leave, it couldn't be just for something physical. It could be for mental health conditions too. And I think that's what you and I had talking about tonight. So I think I'll start about talking a little bit about what family medical leave is. Happy to jump in, you guys, if you have questions, feel free. But, family medical leave is a
Yeah.
federal law.
Before you go into that, I was kind of hoping Madeline would like ask you some questions instead
Yeah,
of just
sure.
letting you kind of go. But I wanted to know, have you seen an uptake in the need for leave in the last 2 years?
I was going to ask her that, but I wanted her to first tell people what FML is. But go
Sure,
ahead.
I can answer that. So would I say an uptick in leave? I would say that, COVID was something a lot of people didn't anticipate. And I don't think that they anticipated that it would be for as long as it, has been going on. And so I will say that I've seen a lot of companies try to, figure out that. And a lot of companies providing leave for COVID reasons. Some companies didn't, but some companies did. I think that a lot of employers are thinking differently about leave because of what's going on, what they call the Great Resignation, which is people are deciding, for a variety of reasons to resign their current positions and to step into different roles, to look for workplaces that have more flexibility. And certainly I can say, for myself, I have seen when it comes to flexibility, they're looking at things like work-life balance. So when I say I've seen an uptick in requests for leave, I wouldn't really say it's COVID related, but I would say that people are more aware of what their benefits are and are, really trying to get more information on how to best utilize that. And I think employers are responding to that by re-examining what they're offering for benefits as a part of a total compensation package.
Okay. I was just curious because with so much going on, you know, we've been talking for quite some time, and it's like, do people really know what's available for them? You know what I'm saying? What are their choices?
So I would say that in general, people know usually that there's something that's available to them. But I don't think, generally speaking, they really know the ins and outs. And so a lot of the information you can absolutely Google, and Google is your friend. A lot of people are smart enough to look at their own company policies and really have a thorough understanding of those. And those that are even smarter, know how to tap into reaching out to their resources, which is usually, if it's a huge organization, they may have a benefits center that can really explain their benefits, or reaching out to their human resources professional to have someone to explain to them what's available. So I will say that a lot of people are more knowledgeable, but maybe not to the degree that someone like myself who does this on a daily basis would be. But I would say yeah, people are a lot. Google, you can find a lot of stuff in Google, and I think a lot of people access that now. Whether they have, like I said, the specific details, not always, but I think that they know, let me look to see what my benefits are.
Cool. I was just want to say something. Go ahead. No, I was just curious. That's all.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really good question. And I think, I say to employees all the time, when you're going to an organization, it is important to, if you're not looking at what the policies are, at the very least, know where to find them.
Yeah.
And, know when you need to, speak with your manager and when you need to go from your manager to human resources, and be willing to engage in conversation. There's nothing to be gained by not doing that, even if it's just for informational purposes, because once you have the information, you can make better decisions for yourself and your family. So I think, I'm always highly encouraging people to do that. I welcome questions when folks come to me with questions. I don't have any reason to misinform them, so I always try to do the best I can to say these are your choices. Like this is what you can do, and I always encourage them if something should change, and you need something different or your situation changes. Like let's have a conversation about that early on, as soon as possible, so that I can better help you, figure out what the next steps would be, versus when something's gone awry. And then, now you're scrambling to do something and I might have less resources to assist.
Do you think it's been a big difference in people going into the office now versus people that's working from home?
Oh, yes, absolutely. 100%. I will tell you that in most of my administrative positions, that's one of the very first questions that if we're going to make an offer or if I'm having a conversation that they want to know. Is this position remote or is there opportunity for hybrid schedule? And I will say my employer, just like many employers, really had to scramble and rethink what does work look like. And I say for a good number of the positions that are not patient facing, in my instance, we've had to really think about what makes sense. And so when we cannot do things with regards to salary, our ability to be more flexible and allow for a hybrid schedule, or in some cases remote, has been what has sealed the deal for us. I will also say that since we've done that, and I can say for many of my counterparts who are HR professionals as well, we've seen things like less call outs because we're able to be a little bit more flexible, greater work-life balance in some instances. I will say that there are other instances, like I feel like myself sometimes, that I'm on from 7 to 7, where I wouldn't necessarily work like that if I was going into the office 5 days a week. Now where I'm more working remotely, I'm able to jump onto a meeting, and it is common in my line of work to have meetings at 6 a.m, and I still be logging off at 6 p.m. Wow. But I will say that employers have had to really rethink what does work look like. And I'm gonna tell you something, most recent interviews, people are asking because gas prices are astronomical. And I will know, I was making an offer today, and one of the things that I talked about as a benefit was that this person, only needed to be in the office 2 days a week. So where the salary may not necessarily have been exactly where she wanted, I had to remind her, you're not going to have to pay for parking because you're only rotating in, 2 days a week. And that's gas that you get to keep in your pocket because you don't necessarily have to come into the office. And so I really think that, yes, employers have had to think differently about what work means. And so a lot of them are doing that.
I love it. I just think it's sad that it took this type of event for employers to really look at what we've been trying to get them to look at.
Absolutely.
Decades,
I agree. 100%. I agree 100%. But I think it's it has its pros and cons, certainly. It definitely has its pros and cons. And as someone who works a hybrid schedule, for me, going forward, I don't think I would ever consider, from this point on, a position that requires me to be 100% in the office. Like I just can't see it for myself. Right. And I have no problems with, I have no problems with working from home. It doesn't bother me. I don't even mind, having a little bit longer days on the days that I'm home. But I don't ever see, like myself, and I can only speak for myself. I can't see myself going back to the office 5 days a week. I just can't see it.
I agree. I totally agree. Really. I mean, because just especially like people, and depend upon what area you're in, like in the DMV, you're dealing with traffic,
that,
you know, stop and go, something that's really like 5 miles up the road. It may take you 45, 50 minutes, an hour to get there. And most people, by the time they get to work, they're already stressed because they just sat in traffic for much longer than they wanted to. So having the ability to not have to deal with that and be at home, it kind of puts you in a whole different mindset. You know, you're relaxed and you can just get up, take your shower, just go from one room to the other or upstairs or downstairs, wherever people have their office set up at. But it saves so much time, so much money. I have noticed, though, in some cases, though, the pay sometimes is a little less than if you were going into an office. But I think on the flip side of that, the things that more relaxed and less traffic, less money, no gas kind of outweigh, you know, those extra dollars that you think you're getting, because by the time you add up the count the cost, which one are you really benefiting from more?
And people they are counting the cost. I can tell you that, you know, I've had employees come in and say, you know, it cost me this much to come into the office. I think, you know, where I work is no different than where other people work, where, you know, people have resigned because they've had other opportunities where they haven't had to rotate in, or they've resigned not because they don't like their job, but because the distance from where they're having to travel, finding something that's closer to home that costs them a little bit less in order to be able to work.
Uh-oh, you're breaking up.
You froze up on
You
that.
froze.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, you're
you
back.
froze up a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, I think COVID has significantly impacted the workplace. And so, you know, and thinking in terms of that, and, you know, none of that, you know, you being able to have work from home remotely or hybrid, you know, it doesn't change your ability to be able to request leave as you need it. That hasn't changed. The law has remained the same in that instance. And so I think that's really why it's important, you know, why it's one of the topics I said, if you're going to talk about mental health, let's talk a little bit about, you know, how families can be impacted and understanding, you know, what your rights are and where you can go to find additional information so that if you need to be able to access leave, that you kind of have an idea of how you can do that and what's out there.
So let's talk about that.
What exactly is FML?
So FML is an abbreviation. It's a federal law. It stands for Family and Medical Leave Act. And basically it provides job protections for employees who need to access medical leave, take time off from work, to you know, recuperate, to get from a serious health condition, to give birth, to provide support for a service member. You know, it really is a law that's designed to help people to be able to access leave in order to take care of themselves and their families.
And is that without their job being jeopardized?
It does. And I have to say that, you know, the whole reason for it was to be able to kind of balance the requirements of work and family, and to be able to protect your job. And so, you know, keeping in mind that, you know, it is a federal law, and that it is also, in most instances, state law. And sometimes the state law is slightly different than the federal law. And so understanding that and knowing where to look. Sometimes the state law is for the benefit of the employee. Like there's some states that instead of 12 weeks, you get 13. And so employers try to do what's in the best interest of, or they should anyway, in the best interest of their employers. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about kind of the things that you need to know about FML. So, you know, comes from the law provides for certain employers. So employers have to meet certain criteria, and then employees have to meet certain criteria. And so anything I say does not encompass every single scenario, but just in general, so people know. So eligible employees, if you're eligible for FML, will be able to be entitled to 12 weeks of unpaid protected leave. And it also requires not just that it protects your job, but it also protects your benefits while you're on that leave. And it does only apply to employers that meet a certain criteria, and that's more legalese. But employees need to know that they can use that leave for like the birth of a child. And when I say birth of a child, that's also like adoption and foster care. It can also be to care for an immediate family member who may have a serious health condition. And like I said, to take care of themselves if they have a serious health condition, but also to provide health and care for military service members as well. And that one is a little bit, just a teeny weeny bit different.
Let me ask
And
you this
so,
question. Like when you talk about the qualifications or the needs for that, as an employer, would you have to have a certain amount of employees?
yeah, I was getting to that.
No,
You do. And so the law kind of says that, for a private employer, there's certain criteria that they need to make, which is one of the reasons to meet, which is one of the reasons why I say, and I say to people when they're hired, this is where you can find policies. And that's one of the ways to be able to determine if your employer is one that covers FML. But yes, you do have to have if you're a private employer, a certain number of employees for the federal law, but the state law may be a little bit different. And so this is the reason why I say it's important to have an understanding of the federal law and state. But for focusing on the employees just for a second, I think it's really important for people to understand if you are working for an employer who's eligible, how you make sure that you're eligible. Because just because the employer is eligible doesn't mean as an employee. So first and foremost, you have to have worked for the employer for 12 months. Doesn't necessarily say full-time. Could be part-time in some instances, but you have to have worked for the employer for 12 months. You have to have worked at least 1,250 hours in that 12 months, which is why I said it doesn't necessarily have to be full-time. The work location where the company employs people have to have at least 50 or more employees in a 75-mile radius. And sometimes that trips people up. And then whether or not the employee has worked the minimum, what constitutes 1,250 hours, there's some specific criteria under that that determines whether or not they meet that, and it may differ slightly by employer. And then employees, if they're found to be eligible, have 12 work weeks. And that's the other thing that may trip people up a little bit. Like, what does that 12 weeks look like? Like, how many hours? And it's 12 work weeks in a 12-month period, for the reasons that I just kind of described. And so the good thing is that for parents, that means a lot, especially when you have, you're trying to work and you have a child and you need to take time off for a physical or mental health condition that rises to the level of serious health condition that requires like routine appointments, with doctors, mental health counselors, speech pathologists, physical therapists, and other kind of professionals. And I think, that's really the crux of why kind of FML kind of started anyway. And so one of the things that I tell people when they reach out to me that sometimes they don't know is that, and this you'll like because of the blender, biological parents are not the only parents that can benefit from FML. Step parents can receive that same protection as biological parents, even if they're not married to the ill child's father or mother, or in the absence of an official adoption. Like, they don't have to officially adopt their stepchild to be able to be eligible for FML. And then lastly, in some circumstances, parents can continue to utilize FML even when their children are adults. And so really having an understanding of that and, what does that look like and not only doing the information for yourself, but being able to talk about that with, someone in HR, if you're at the point where you want to be able to request leave, is really important. I see you looking surprised, Brandon, and that's what I mean when I say understanding what your choices are, right?
No, exactly. I mean, because my next question was about the non-biological parent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, let me shut my mouth a little bit and let you just.
No, but I think a lot of people aren't aware that certainly, may rise to the case. And so I wanted to make sure to mention that today specifically because, of, the area that you guys are usually discussing on Tuesdays. And the other thing that I think people should know is FML recognizes that there are like a plethora of illnesses, impairments, medical conditions, whether it be physical or mental, that can qualify as a serious health condition. And I always say to people, listen, I'm not the doctor, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you feel like you have something, or if you're telling me you need leave, mm-hmm. Then I'm going to send you the forms you need. And you have your doctor fill it out and let your doctor determine if this is a medical condition. Now, I won't say that every HR practitioner does that, and there's a very good reason for that. But I say all the time, like, if you feel like it, mm-hmm. and you're telling me this is what you need, I'm going to send you the forms, because really that's the process. The process says you mm-hmm. have said that I think I'm going to need this time, and then you back up what you're requesting by having your doctor fill out certain forms to be able to, justify and support what it is you're asking for. And, the key really with FML is treatment by a healthcare provider under a doctor's care is really, kind of what it is that you want to be able to keep in mind. And so there's so many different things that fall under that, that I say all the time. I highly encourage people, hey, listen, it doesn't hurt to ask. And if you're not eligible, let them tell you why you're not eligible versus just assuming that you're not eligible mm-hmm. because maybe you don't understand, what the law provides for you. And then the other thing that's really important is FML you can take on an intermittent basis, meaning if you have to, either yourself or your family member take them to appointments, or it's on a continuous basis. So, it could be that you have an appointment once a week, every week for 6 months. That's under a doctor's care, right? Not just if you are having like surgery or you have a condition where you're consistently in the hospital. And then, there's always questions around what qualifies as, a doctor. And I think I talked about this with you a little bit, Madeline, where I said, it's a doctor can be a licensed therapist. Mm-hmm. It could be a speech pathologist. And so really, it's so broad that I always say, and I'll continue to say, and you'll hear me continue to say this, make the request.
Right.
And then let someone else tell you this isn't eligible, or it doesn't rise to that occasion. Never assume just because it isn't doctor, because doctor can be a nurse practitioner. That's a healthcare professional. Yeah.
So quick question.
Sure.
So when someone submit paperwork for FML, right, and it's approved, now are they paid during that time, or do they get paid still during that time? Say they had to be out for 60 days.
So FML is unpaid leave. However, many employers, I will say most that I know of, the ones that I've worked for, have always required that you use your leave before you go unpaid. And then have, a policy surrounding how that happens, whether it's you use all of your sick first and then your vacation and then any personal, and then you go on unpaid leave. FML does not guarantee that you get paid except for in the instance of using your leave. What it does is it protects your job so that you can take the care that you need and still be able to return to your job and your seniority over the period of time that you need to be out.
Okay.
That's really important to know.
Mm-hmm. Really. Mm-hmm. It is. And, it's, I have to say that there's a lot of there's things that go along with that, right? So let's say you make a request. First, you need to know that you do have to request that leave in advance. You do. The law says that you have to give at least 30 days notice. when you can, when it's foreseeable. And if it's not foreseeable, as soon as possible. So you have to request that. And then, if you are granted that, you still have to be able to use whatever call out policy that your organization has. So whether your call out policy is you have to give an hour's notice if you're not going to be there. FML says, I'm going to protect your job, but you still are required to call out and identify that I'm going to need to use FML. So it's not just a thing where you can just take off and you don't have anything that you're supposed to do. It really does protect your job, but there are things that you have to do in order to be able to stay eligible for FML. And so, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because I'm thinking how these last 2 years have really impacted all of us. But there's so many people that have, had like breakdowns because of lost of family members, lost a job, what I'm saying, then get back into the workforce and not really being able to perform at the level that they used to. And so I just think that this information is just so vitally important because it helps assist those that's listening or watching. It helps assist in how they attack this area.
And outside of FML, right? So say someone has already exhausted all of their leave, okay? But then they've dealt with some type of issue and they just absolutely have to have time off. Other than FML, is there other things that employers offer people to kind of assist with that?
So a lot of employers have things like, employee wellness. And so they offer things like counseling. Sometimes the state has leave that you can access, like Maryland has sick and safe leave. And I do, have some notes on that as well, because there's some things about sick and safe that are very interesting that are not with FML. So, sometimes people can access if they have like floating holidays or personal days, things like that. But what I would say is if a person has for themselves, and this has to be for themselves, an issue where they've exhausted their 12 weeks of FML and they're still not well, my first advice would be, start early talking to your organization, your HR professional about that, about, your concerns about returning. And, if it's just, I need another week or two after FML, that's a different conversation than I need another couple months, So then I think, you have to start looking into things like your long-term disability. But as far as job protection, certainly that's the time to start thinking of things like the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and, kind of what that means, for yourself with regards to work. And so I always say, listen, if it's looking like this time when you're getting to the end of your 12 weeks is not going to be enough time, let's start talking about that soon. If your return to work date is X and you're a couple weeks out from that and you're not well enough to be able to return, let's have that conversation. The worst mistake you can make is not engaging in a conversation with your employer. That's the worst. I mean, just assuming that you can come back whenever you want or not being honest about what it is that you need is the worst mistake you can make in this instance. And, I always say nothing ventured, nothing gained. If you don't ask, you can't receive. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. So, I always encourage my employees and listen, I understand. I had kids, I've been hospitalized. I've been blessed that I have not had to stay out for FML longer than that. But I will tell you, I've had to care for a parent who was ill, who had, serious health conditions where I needed FML so that I could take care of a parent. So I am empathetic when people say, I have this thing going on in my life. Can you help me? My answer to that is yes, absolutely. But I can't help you if I don't know what's going on. Yeah. And so if you don't want to say, until the day that you're due back, I'm not coming back because I have this issue, then, you've really narrowed your window, and you've narrowed my ability to be able to assist you going forward, if I can, to be able to advocate on your behalf, if I can, by not engaging in the conversation. So the very worst thing you can do is to not engage your HR professional, or whoever in your organization is the person who is dedicated to be able to answer questions, is to not say. And I understand people are afraid to say, I'm not ready to come back. But the law does provide some protection, and then instances where you really can't come back to work, that's when you need to start talking and thinking and considering things like long-term disability. Mm-hmm. But you don't know what your options are if you are afraid to engage.
Great. That's good to know. Okay.
So I will say that people often ask me, like, how do I ask for it? Like, I'm afraid to ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to necessarily say the words, I need FML, but I love when people come to me and say, I need FML, because I know what I'm supposed to do when they say that. Right? Like, there are certain things when you ask for FML, whether it's verbally or in writing, that an employer has to do. They have to send you notice of your eligibility, and they have to get you the paperwork you need in order to be able to request it. Right? And so you can simply do that by making them aware. I always like when people put it in writing, put it in an email. I think I'm going to need leave. I need FML. And so they have a certain amount of time they need to give you your paperwork first to tell you you're eligible or not, because if you're not eligible, they need to tell you that. They need to list the reasons why. And then you have a certain amount of time to get that documentation completed. And this is the other thing that can hang people up as well. Sending paperwork to your doctor's office and assuming they're going to fill it out and send it back is a mistake. Having a conversation with your doctor and saying, this is what I'm asking for. And I say have that before you even make a request. Send the documentation to your doctor's office, asking them, this is what I need. Doctors are very familiar with FML. They know what they have to do with regards to that. They know, what they need to complete. And then making sure that gets back. For myself, every time I've ever had to use FML, and I'm not ashamed to say, like, I have used my benefit just like anybody else, I always say, I'll come pick it up. And I'll send it to my employer myself. I don't personally have my doctor send the paperwork, because I like to know that it got where it was supposed to go. I have a copy of the confirmation receipt, and I know it's there because I've sent it. Always making sure I know where to send it. The other thing I always say is, if the policy does not demand that you have to send it to your manager, send it where it needs to go, which is usually human resources.
Correct.
The manager doesn't necessarily need to know every single thing. Now, they do have the right to know some things. They have the right to ask you, how long do you think you're going to be out? They have the right to ask you that and ask clarifying questions with regards to that in order to help approve your leave. But yeah, how much information do you need to share? Like, you can tell, and you should be saying, I'm expected to be away for this long, and loosely, this is the reason why. I have a serious medical condition. I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby. I'm adopting a child, or I'm bringing in a child care. I'm supporting a military service member. Like, those things you can say to your manager and should say, and expect to have someone ask you more questions. And the reason for that is to be able to understand what you need and to make sure what you're requesting is eligible under the law. That's not invasive. It is just what it is. Like, we can't tell you if you are eligible without kind of knowing what it is that you need.
Because I was thinking about back in 2016, I had surgery, and it just came back to me that you use FML for that. Yeah. Wow, how did I forget that?
And it was so because it is, you give little information to your actual supervisors or managers, and most of the information go directly to HR. Now, you do at times have supervisors or managers that try to dig and, ask personal questions, and, you are not obligated to have to share that pertinent information with them. Just like what you said, the basis of, this is what's going on. This is how much time I know I'm going to need, but everything else go to HR.
Yep. And then the other important part, and, this is the other thing that I think is kind of touchy for people is, employers are who are covered by FML are required to continue your benefits while you're out. And if you are unpaid while they're doing that, you can expect for them to want you to pay your portion either while you're out or when you return. And so that's something to consider as well. When you're out, how are your benefits going to be paid? If you're not using leave, and most people just use their leave and their benefits continue to be deducted. But if for some reason it becomes unpaid, there is still an expectation that you're paying those premiums, whether it's because you're submitting a check or you're paying it, back when you return to work and having it deducted from your pay, if that's an option. But, not only does it protect your job, it does protect your benefits, but just understand that you will be responsible for paying for those benefits while you're out. Yeah. Let me see. And so we talked about steering your questions for FML to your HR person. Here's the other thing. And so this is what's important about the law. So the FMLA, which is the Family Medical Leave Act, makes it unlawful for an employer to interfere, restrain, or deny you your ability to exercise this right under FML. And so that's really important for you to be able to understand. It's also unlawful for an employer to discharge, discriminate, or retaliate against the person for exercising their rights under FML. And so I say, if you feel, that's what's happening, I always encourage a conversation with HR first. And if you really feel like you cannot get to a resolution or you're not being heard, then I encourage people to, seek whatever legal advice that they have to. But the whole purpose of the law is so people are not discriminated against or retaliated against for using this benefit. And I think in the spirit of that, parents who really need to be able to take care of their children and their families aren't discriminated against when they need time off. And like I said, I also encourage looking at state law, which is different. In Maryland, since we are in Maryland, I'll just focus on that a little bit. Maryland has Sick and Safe, which, when this came out, and that was 2018, that was really interesting. It's really called the Healthy Working Families Act. And the requirements for that is a little bit different. So if the employer has 15 employees, they're required to provide paid sick and safe leave. And if it's 14 or less, it can be unpaid. And with that, you do have to accrue the time. So that is a little bit different than FML. But what I love about sick and safe leave, and the reason I say I love this is because when employees call me and they're in a pinch, I remind them about sick and safe. It is to care for or treat the employee's mental or physical illness. It's also, you can use it for preventative care for the employee's self or for family members, and listen to how family members, they describe family member as a spouse, as a child, as a parent-in-law, as a grandparent or grandchild or sibling. That expands what the coverage is for FML. And that's for Maryland. That's awesome, isn't it? Like for FML, it's just, a spouse, a parent, a child. But Maryland Sick and Safe expands that to grandchildren, grandparents, sibling.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I would encourage anyone listening to this who works in Maryland to take a little look through their employer's policy with regards to sick and safe. Now, sick and safe, you do have to accrue that there is a, kind of a method and way to accrue that. And employers can request documentation. The other thing about sick and safe, and this is the safe part, is that if the absence from work is due to a domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking committed against the employee or the employee's family member, and the leave is being used to obtain medical help, legal services, or something like that, that also falls under the Maryland Sick and Safe. Which, that is not necessarily addressed in FML, but that is certainly a part of, your benefits under Maryland Sick and Safe leave.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because there has been a uptake in increase in domestic violence, during this time. And so just understanding that, you even have certain rights concerning that, and certainly, you can possibly obtaining certain leave because of that is important, because a lot of people just feel like, they're their wits end because they don't know what they can do or if they can do anything.
Well, here's this other little nugget. Let me just drop another one for you. An employer is prohibited under this law from taking adverse action against the employee who exercises their right under that act. In other words, let's say, for instance, you have an employee who calls out for one of these things that we've talked about. An employer can't decide to write them up because they're using sick and safe leave because they've called out for that. So I always say to people, it's not necessarily required, but I say to my team, and I say to the people that I work with, tell your manager, I have an emergency or I have this going on. I need to use sick and safe. Like I say to them, use those words. I need to use sick and safe. And I train my managers when they hear those words. We know how much leave they have. If they need to use sick and safe and they have not used and exhausted all of that time, we're just going to let that one go. Even if we suspect they're not necessarily telling the truth, it really just isn't worth it. We're going to let that one go.
Wow.
And so, I'm not sure. I hope that that's helpful to someone in your audience who's listening, which is why I always say, hey, listen, Google Department of Labor and Google your state's Department of Labor and see, what things you may have. They usually have like a facts sheet. So even if you're not reading the entire law, that it can kind of answer a few questions for you. But that's one of the things about sick and safe from Maryland that doesn't necessarily fall under FML that I think would be helpful to people who are looking to request leave because something has happened in their life. Yeah. Is there any other questions you have for me that I can answer?
I had a question. I think it may be different, but what is EAP, like the Employee Assistance
Program?
Yeah, what is that, and how does that help people, maybe during this time if they're working and dealing with different issues?
Sure. So I think that an employee EAP and employee assistance program differs from each employer, but generally speaking, it usually and can give the employee access to things like counseling for a limited number of sessions, and not mental health counseling. It can be a resource for things like if you're looking for a doctor. If you are sometimes EAP, if you're looking for legal advice, being able to, kind of put you in touch with other resources. Sometimes in some instances, if an employee is having performance problems at work, it can be something that a manager can recommend or mandate in order to help the employee keep their job. And so it really just is going to depend versus the employer. Sometimes, one of the employers I'm familiar with during COVID, the assistance program often helped people to secure childcare as they were, trying to go to work and work from home and things like that. You were able to be connected with resources for childcare. And so it's worth it to take a look at that as a benefit. And I say to anyone who was a full-time employee entitled to benefits, you are doing yourself a disservice if you do not pay attention to those types of, like if you have like a new hire orientation where they kind of go over the list of benefits you have, you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not paying attention to what those benefits are. I mean, those are things that you earn by being an employee, and at the very least have an idea of what am I entitled to. An employee, an EAP is one that often is overlooked, but it's a valuable resource in a time of need. I've known people who have needed access to legal advice very quickly, and their employee assistance program provided for that. And so being able to say, hey, you need to be able to check that, check this out. This is your resource you can call. And often calling and using that, either the legal advice or any free counseling treatments that you are entitled to is anonymous. So they don't go back to your boss and say, this person is called and used, this part of EAP. They may say, this is the number of employees who have access, but they don't go back and share, any information that you share. And so you earn that. That's something you earn every day by going to work. And so certainly you should access it if that's something that is available to you.
So in earning that, is that a day one earning or is that like hours earning? Like, do they have to have
It depends. It depends on how you are eligible for benefits at the employer. Some employers, you are eligible for benefits on day one. And other employers, you're eligible for benefits on the first day after working 30 days. The first of the month after being there for 30 days, whatever that date is. So it really is, that's the other thing you should pay attention to. Even when if you're moving to a new employer and you're negotiating salary and you're asking them, ask them, can I take a look at what you offer for benefits and when are my benefits available to me? That's part of the negotiation when you're trying to get a new job. And if you're at a job that you've been at for a while, it's worth it to pay attention to that. And then often benefits change. Here's the other thing. When they send around those things, those notes, those flyers, those posters that they put up to say open enrollment, take the time to see what is going on. Attend those virtual or in-person reviews of these are the things that are going on in benefits. You'd be surprised at what you learn is going to change. And you'd be surprised sometimes to learn that this is, we're not doing this anymore. We've switched to this. That's really how you keep on top of what you're eligible for. And, if something happens and you need to access your benefits quickly, at least you have an idea. Even if you don't know everything, you have an idea of what your resources are. It's worth it. Let me take that back. We do not do that for nothing. Like when we send out open enrollment, we really want you to take the time to understand that. And I'm going to give you an example. I was at an employer, not-for-profit employer, that offered for their retirement a certain percentage employees were entitled to that they would match. And when I started at that employer, I don't think that was a benefit that people access very often. So when we started having benefit fairs, I actually invited people from the retirement company to come in and talk to our employees. And they used to say, let me tell you how much money you are leaving on the table. And, there was an uptick of people signing up for retirement because they weren't really realizing that. And if employer is saying to you, I'm going to match 4% of what you put in. And you decide, well, I can't afford 4%. That's 4% of your salary that you earn that you are leaving with the employer. And so, I always say when they send those emails out to say open enrollment, if your employer is the type that will have a fair benefits fair, open enrollment fair, it is worth it to take the few minutes to see what has changed. And a lot of times they will send you, like, this is what you need to know. You don't have to go through everything. It's worth it to know change, but it's also worth it to know, do you have to re-sign up for benefits? That's the other thing. I love when I spend 60 days telling people, like, open enrollment's going to be at this time. Last time you can sign up for your benefits. And on the last day, folks are saying, can I sign up for this? Or 2 days after it's over, it's done. Now you have to wait until there's either an event in your life or the next open enrollment to be able to sign up for those benefits. Flex spending is one of those ones for me that I say to folks all the time, like, you really need to pay attention to that. If you wear glasses, you have prescriptions, if you go to the dentist, like flex spending, there's a lot of things you can do there. And some employers actually match that, right? Some employers, if you put in 500, they're going to give you 500. And people say, well, I can't afford to have that money taken out every pay period. Well, but you just left that money on the table for the employer too. So, it's worth it. It's worth it to understand because you never know when you're going to need that. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. If you all don't take away anything else from me, it is worth it to understand what you are entitled to so that when you need it and you don't have time to try to figure it out, at least I know that there's an employee assistance program. Let me see what it can do for me. You earn that. You're entitled to it.
Yep. And those sessions through there, they're free. They give you those. I know some companies have, they give you 8, and there are some that even do 12 or 16. And it's like, it's there for you.
And you don't have to wait. You don't have to necessarily wait a long time for an appointment that you connected. I know some employers have, and it's the same thing, not just I've seen employee health and wellness help with childcare, with elder care. with mental health treatment, with substance abuse treatment, with legal advice if needed. You can get discounts for home insurance and car insurance, like things pet insurance nowadays. I mean, honestly, like I said, it's worth it to understand, like, what is it that I'm entitled to?
Yeah. Wow.
I see the wheels turning, Brandon.
I'm just, because it's just so much, it's so much, but it's so needed. And one of the things that we said coming into 2022 is we didn't want to do our traditional in the blender. We wanted to expose families and loved ones to just life skills and life advancement, period. And these are things that people need to know. You're getting a job, you're looking for a job, you don't really, most people focus on the pay, but they don't really understand the benefits.
Yes. And that's all a part of it. Total compensation is what we call it. And,
exactly.
I negotiate salary often. And I say to people, what's important to you? My employer offers a tuition benefit that, loosely speaking, pays college tuition for undergraduate dependents up to age 23. So when people come they want to talk salary and they're looking at numbers, my first question is, did you tell me that you have children who are school age going into college? Let's talk about that benefit and how much is that worth for you? And if you're someone who just takes their benefit information and tucks it away, doesn't really read it, you wouldn't necessarily know that. But it's worth understanding that when you have to go to negotiate, because those are the things that, it may not be, but it may be worth it to you.
Yeah, because my thing is, if an employer is going to pay for your child's college tuition, that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. Absolutely. And not only that, but if they pay a certain portion of your tuition, if you want to go back to school and you want to better yourself, and there's a portion of that you can access, that's worth talking about. And it may not be cash in your pocket at the time, but it definitely is something that's worth it in terms of what's important to you. And employers know that, which is why they try to do a better job of offering good benefits. Hey, listen, sometimes it comes down to, how many holidays and how many personal days and how many vacation days do I get versus going to this employer? And this employer is going to pay me this much more, but this employee is going to give me access to more vacation, sick, personal days. That's worth it to me if I'm a parent who has small children. It's worth it to me if I'm the type of person who likes to go on vacation. And let me see what that equals out to be.
Yeah. Wow. And we only have 3 minutes left. Oh my goodness.
I don't even know if we took any questions, but I'm happy to answer
the surface of things.
Yeah, because I don't even want to ask another question because we just don't have time. But I'm sitting here and it's like, I'm thinking, when I worked a regular 9 to 5, it's so many things you had to consider, but not even knowing how to go about getting that information. I thank God for Google, because now,
Google is your friend. When people say that, it's true. Google is your friend.
Yes. Right. I mean, we talk about that all the time. Google it. It's just like anything, you just pick it up and somewhere somebody's going to answer that question. And there's one thing I love about this is, just like we were thinking about questions, there's so many people that are watching and listening that are thinking about the same thing. They have the same question in mind. And so, listen, you guys that are watching us and listening, take this. I hope you took some notes.
Right.
I hope you took some notes, because this was chock full of pertinent information that's going to advance you. Trust me. Because I know there were some things, and it's funny because when I went back to school, HR. And then Madeline's HR. and then we're talking to the HR professional.
Hey, listen, I don't know everything, but I know some things. And I know a lot about some things, absolutely. And
I
HR is
know,
one of
that's
the things
right.
that I absolutely 100%, it's my passion. That's my passion. So happy to share.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so broad. I mean, it's so much information that,
Sure.
you can share that will help somebody.
Hmm.
This is just a small part of it here.
Sure.
So we definitely have to bring you back on the for another part of it. We'll get
Sure.
together and discuss what else we think that people can benefit from during this time. I think these last couple of years has probably been the most challenging for probably almost everybody in their life. Nobody ever expected what the last 2 years were like to be.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Well, I'm absolutely happy to come back. If you have your listeners who have things that they want to know or would like to hear about under the guise of HR, they can put it in the comments section and you and I can get together. I'm happy to come back and talk about it, but I hope it's been helpful to someone. That's really what I'm
Yeah.
hoping is that someone was able to benefit from the things that I've shared. And if there's questions that we weren't able to get to here, happy to try to see if I can provide some answers to you so that, your listeners are able to get some answers.
absolutely. And if you guys have any questions that you want to ask and you wasn't able to put them in the chat or you didn't really want to ask in public, you can send us an email to
Mhm.
weareablendedfamily@gmail.com, and we'll make sure that those questions get answered in the next broadcast, and we will not state your name. So again,
Mm-mm. I don't know if I froze or you froze. Have a good night.